In May 1945, as Germany capitulated, one of the most feared weapons of World War II fell with it, the Tiger tank. Across Europe, from Normandy to the Eastern Front, hundreds of these gigantic armored vehicles lay destroyed, abandoned, or captured. Suddenly, the Allies had access to the most formidable tanks of the conflict, and a scramble began to find, study, and determine the fate of every remaining Tiger. By early May, with the Third Reich collapsing, the Panzerwaffe had effectively ceased to function as a fighting force. Tiger I and Tiger II tanks were stranded all over Europe, immobilized by lack of fuel, mechanical breakdowns, or simply overwhelmed by Allied forces. Many had been deserted by their crews, left along roads, in forests, or on the outskirts of battlefields where they had fought their final actions. When Germany's unconditional surrender came into force on May 8, 1945, roughly 1,800 Tigers of both variants had been produced. Most had already been lost in combat, but several hundred still existed, scattered across occupied regions. These surviving tanks faced mixed circumstances. Some remained intact in depots. Others had been sabotaged by their own crews to prevent capture. Still others had simply run out of fuel during the chaotic final days of the war. At testing centers like Kummersdorf and Hillersleben, Allied teams found Tigers in varying stages of completion, along with technical documents, spare parts, and training manuals. American soldiers found additional Tigers at the Henschel factory complex in Bavaria. British forces encountered abandoned heavy tank units in northern Germany and Austria. On the Eastern Front, Soviet troops overran Tiger positions across Silesia, East Prussia, and Czechoslovakia. The wide range of conditions surprised Allied armored officers. Some Tigers were almost untouched, preserved by surrendering units. Others were wrecked by internal demolition charges, their turrets blown clear by crews determined not to let them fall into enemy hands. Many bore the brutal marks of combat: holes punched through armor, destroyed tracks, burned out engines, and scars from the anti-tank weapons that had finally defeated them. Unlike aircraft, which could simply be flown away, the Tigers presented an immediate logistical challenge. Each Tiger I weighed over 50 tons, and the Tiger II exceeded 70. Moving them required specialized transport, rail lines, or heavy recovery vehicles. The Allied Control Commission issued strict rules. All German armored vehicles were to be disabled at once, their weapons rendered unusable, and their fuel tanks emptied. A debate soon arose among Allied leadership. Some wanted the Tigers destroyed as potent symbols of Nazi military power, while others emphasized their intelligence value, especially their armor metallurgy, optics, and the famous 88mm gun. What soon became evident was that the Tiger's legend would outlive the actual tanks, even as they were systematically tested, dismantled, or scrapped. As the occupation began, the Allies launched coordinated efforts to locate and study Tiger tanks. Each nation had faced them in battle and suffered losses. Now they had the chance to learn exactly what made them so formidable. The United States acted quickly. American tank units had confronted Tigers in North Africa, Italy, and France, often with heavy casualties. Ordnance teams fanned out across Germany and Austria to secure intact examples for study. At Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, facilities were prepared to receive German armor. One of the first Tigers shipped to the U.S. came from North Africa, captured during the Tunisian campaign. More followed from Europe as the war ended. American research focused heavily on armor penetration trials, testing how U.S. anti-tank guns performed against Tiger armor at various distances and angles. Engineers fired 75mm, 76mm, and 90mm rounds at Tiger hulls, carefully documenting at what ranges the armor could be penetrated. The findings confirmed what frontline crews already suspected. The Tiger's frontal armor was extremely resistant to Allied tank guns. The standard 75mm gun on most Shermans could barely penetrate the front plate even at very close range. The improved 76mm gun did better, but still struggled. Only the powerful 90mm gun mounted on late-war tanks like the M26 Pershing could reliably engage Tigers head-on.
The British, too, had a painful history with the Tiger. From Tunisia to Normandy, British crews had learned to fear the 88mm gun, which could knock out Cromwells and Churchills long before they were within effective distance. At the School of Tank Technology in Chertsey and at Lulworth, British specialists carried out detailed inspections and trials on captured Tigers. Their evaluations went beyond armor. They dismantled engines, transmissions, and suspension systems to understand the engineering behind the Tiger's battlefield reputation and its mechanical shortcomings. They noted, in particular, the interleaved road wheel design, which offered a smooth ride but was highly vulnerable to mud, ice, and maintenance complications.
British engineers documented the performance of the Maybach engine, noting not only its power output, but also its heavy fuel consumption and demanding upkeep. At Bovington, a Tiger captured in Tunisia became the centerpiece of British evaluations. Test drivers reported that, despite its enormous size, the tank was surprisingly agile, thanks to its advanced steering mechanisms. Gunners praised the exceptional clarity of the German optics and the precision of the 88mm gun. At the same time, British reports emphasized the Tiger's chronic reliability issues, the difficulty of repairing it under field conditions, and the significant logistical strain these tanks placed on their units. The Soviet Union, having faced more Tigers than any other Allied nation, had an even greater incentive to study them. From the Battle of Kursk to the advance on Berlin, Soviet armored forces had repeatedly fought against German heavy tank battalions. Soviet trophy brigades swept through occupied Germany and Eastern Europe, confiscating every Tiger they encountered. Restorable examples were shipped to proving grounds near Kubenka, outside Moscow. Soviet testing was exhaustive and unsentimental. Engineers fired captured German weapons at Tiger armor to assess its weaknesses, and they tested Soviet 85mm, 100mm, and 122mm guns against the tank to determine the most effective battlefield tactics. Stalin personally followed developments in German heavy armor and urged Soviet designers to integrate lessons learned from their analysis into new heavy tank programs, such as the IS-3 and the later T-10 series. The Soviets also found Tigers in unusual places. In Prague, they recovered tanks undergoing repairs or upgrades. In Silesia, they captured entire training facilities, complete with Tigers used for instructional purposes. Some of these tanks were restored to running condition and even displayed in propaganda demonstrations, showcasing Soviet dominance over German technology. As the Allies moved deeper into Germany, competition grew over who would secure the rarest and most advanced examples. Every major power sought to obtain a late production Tiger II, considered the pinnacle of German heavy tank engineering. Factories and strongholds contained partially assembled hulls and turrets, while proving grounds housed prototype variants that revealed developmental paths never completed due to the war's end. This scramble for advanced German armor mirrored the rising political tensions that would soon shape the Cold War. German tank crews and engineers became vital sources of information. Some were interrogated, while others willingly offered their expertise in return for better conditions or employment opportunities. Their knowledge helped Allied teams operate, maintain, and evaluate the captured Tigers. They explained troubleshooting procedures, described common mechanical issues, and clarified German heavy tank combat doctrine. Allied teams documented every detail: interior layout, ammunition storage arrangements, crew ergonomics, fire control equipment, optical systems, and the advanced mechanisms that gave the 88mm gun its lethal effectiveness. The range of Tiger variants encountered left investigators fascinated. While early Tiger I tanks maintained consistent configurations, later versions incorporated modifications resulting from battlefield lessons. Engineers identified vehicles with altered track patterns, revised vision ports, and experimental armor layouts. The Tiger II revealed even more diversity. Early production models featured the so-called Porsche turret, while later ones used the refined Henschel turret. At the Henschel facilities, Allied teams uncovered drawings and plans for variants that never reached production, including proposed tank destroyers and armored recovery vehicles based on the Tiger chassis. Particularly valuable were Tigers found with full sets of documentation.
Some German units had kept extremely detailed maintenance logs, listing every malfunction, repair, adjustment, and combat event. These records gave the Allies insight into the Tiger's operational realities, information that raw technical specifications could never provide. They revealed breakdown frequencies, the typical service life of key components, and the immense spare parts burden that made Tiger battalions so difficult to sustain on campaign. Logistical officers studied these documents closely and concluded that German heavy tanks were not defeated by their design, but by the impossibility of supporting them in the field. By the end of 1946, the major intelligence gathering phase had concluded. Dozens of Tigers had been thoroughly tested and analyzed, and their characteristics were preserved in thousands of pages of technical reports. These findings informed the next generation of Western tank development, from armor layout to gun performance to fire control principles. But for most of the Tigers that survived the war, the different destiny awaited: destruction. By late 1945, the Allied Control Council had ordered that Germany retain no armored fighting vehicles of any kind. Only a small number of Tigers were kept for research, museum preservation, or limited testing. The remainder, scattered across Europe in various states of usability, were slated for disposal. The disposal process varied depending on condition and location. In Germany, designated scrapping sites were set up at former training grounds and military depots. Tigers considered unsuitable for further study were eliminated systematically. Some were used as target hulks for Allied tank crews to practice gunnery against real German armor, providing valuable training. Others were cut apart for scrap metal, their thick armor torched into sections and shipped off to steel plants. At Bergen-Horn, in northern Germany, British forces gathered large quantities of captured German armor, including Tigers, Panthers, and self-propelled guns. Engineers experimented with the most efficient ways to neutralize them, removing weapons, draining all fluids, disabling engines, or simply blowing them apart with demolition charges.
The turrets of some Tigers were blown completely off, leaving them spectacularly but irreversibly destroyed. In Normandy, several Tigers knocked out during the fighting remained where they had fallen. Local authorities sometimes buried them while clearing roads and farmland. Others were dragged to collection sites and eventually dismantled for scrap. The French army briefly explored the possibility of putting captured German tanks into service, but the logistical nightmare of sustaining Tigers, combined with their immense fuel requirements, quickly made the idea unrealistic. The Soviet approach in their occupation zones differed. While they scrapped many Tigers, they also retained a significant number for study and display. Museums in Moscow and Leningrad received Tigers for public exhibition as symbols of Soviet victory over German technology. A few were restored to running condition for propaganda films and military parades, though such cases were the exception. Economic pressures heavily influenced decisions about what to destroy. Post-war Europe suffered severe shortages of metal, and the thousands of tons of steel, copper, and other valuable materials locked inside abandoned German armor represented vital resources. Scrapping Tigers and other panzers contributed directly to reconstruction. In many recovering communities, the arrival of scrap dealers to dismantle derelict tanks offered much-needed employment and income during extremely difficult times. Environmental concerns also played a role. Abandoned tanks leaked fuel, lubricants, and other contaminants into the soil and water. Authorities pushed to remove them from farmland, forests, and rivers. In some cases, Tigers that had plunged into lakes or rivers during combat were left underwater, deemed too costly or dangerous to salvage. Many of these submerged wrecks still exist today, occasionally rediscovered by divers or exposed during unusually low water levels. By 1948, nearly all Tigers were gone. Wrecked tanks had been scrapped or buried, and depot stocks destroyed. The few preserved in museums or test centers represented almost everything that remained from the roughly 1,800 Tigers ever built. The speed and thoroughness of their elimination reflected the Allies' determination to eradicate Germany's capacity for war.
Unlike aircraft, which could be stored or repurposed for civilian use, the Tiger had no peaceful function. It was a weapon built for one purpose alone. In the post-war world, it had no place outside museums and proving grounds. Yet a small number of Tigers did survive in foreign service or long-term preservation, and these rare survivors helped shape how the Tiger's legend endured even as the tanks themselves vanished. France retained several Tigers for testing and training. At Saumur, the French armored school used a Tiger I to train instructors and demonstrate German engineering principles. French engineers studied the 88mm gun in hopes of applying its lessons to their own tank destroyer designs. By the early 1950s, however, the Tigers were retired due to maintenance headaches and the impossibility of obtaining spare parts. The Saumur example survived and remains on display. Britain kept several Tigers for museum and instructional purposes. The Tiger at Bovington became one of the most famous survivors and was eventually restored to running condition decades later. British technical schools used captured Tigers to teach engineering students, giving them hands-on exposure to German design. When their instructional roles ended, most of these vehicles were transferred to museums rather than scrapped. The Soviet Union preserved the largest number of Tigers. Museums across the Eastern Bloc, from Moscow to Warsaw to Prague, displayed them, sometimes still bearing combat damage as visual proof of Soviet triumph. Others remained stored in depots and were occasionally brought out for military demonstrations or commemorative events. Access to multiple examples allowed Soviet engineers to conduct more detailed studies than their Western counterparts. No nation attempted to operate Tigers in active military service after the war. Their chronic mechanical issues, extreme fuel consumption, and impossible spare parts demands made them impractical for any army. Unlike the Bf-109 or the U-52, which saw modest foreign service, the Tiger was simply too specialized and too resource-intensive to maintain. However, the tank's fearsome reputation slowed destruction as historical consciousness grew. By the 1960s, historians and museum curators recognized that only a tiny fraction of Tigers had survived. Efforts began to recover wrecks from forests, marshes, and abandoned battlefields across Eastern Europe. Many were badly damaged or incomplete, but even partial hulls held significant historical value.
Restoring Tigers became a specialized discipline. Museums like Bovington spent years bringing their Tiger I back to running condition, a project completed in the 1990s. Other institutions focused on static preservation, halting corrosion and stabilizing surviving components. Private collectors occasionally acquired Tiger parts, though complete tanks remained extraordinarily rare and valuable. Today, only a handful of complete Tigers exist worldwide. Bovington's Tiger I is the only one capable of running, and even then it is operated sparingly to preserve its irreplaceable mechanical components. Other surviving examples are displayed in museums across Russia, France, Germany, Britain, and the United States. Each represents not just a single vehicle, but the entire legacy of one of history's most iconic armored machines. Several Tiger II tanks also survive, including the well-known example in La Glaise, Belgium, a King Tiger abandoned during the Battle of the Bulge and kept as a monument. Additional examples reside in Kubinka, Fort Benning, and various European museums, standing as silent witnesses to the final years of the Third Reich. Because so few remain, Tigers have become the focus of intense historical study. Every surviving example is meticulously photographed, measured, and documented. Rare components from periscopes to radios to ammunition racks are cataloged whenever discovered. These few tanks have become priceless artifacts, invaluable for the insights they offer. What survived the immediate post-war destruction was largely a matter of chance. Tigers preserved were those that happened to be captured by units inclined to keep them, stored in locations overlooked by scrap teams,
or simply lucky enough to avoid demolition orders. The sweeping destruction of the late 1940s means that the surviving tanks represent less than 1% of all Tigers built, fragmentary remnants of a machine whose fame through as its physical presence dwindled. The post-war story of the Tiger is ultimately one of rapid eradication followed by slow recognition of what had been lost. In their determination to dismantle German military strength, the Allies destroyed nearly all examples of what would later become one of the most studied tanks in military history. By the time historians and museums sought to preserve them, almost none were left. Searches for lost Tigers continue even today. From time to time, a hull is discovered in a forest or recovered from a riverbed, generating widespread interest even if the tank is too damaged to restore. These occasional finds underscore how quickly even the most formidable machines can vanish, and how the post-war world reshaped the legacy of German armor just as profoundly as it reshaped the legacy of the Luftwaffe. If you enjoyed this story, consider exploring what happened to the Panzerwaffe's Panther tanks after the war. That video examines how Germany's most numerous heavy tank was captured, studied, and dispersed across the globe in the post-war era.